Picture this. You wake up on what's supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Your wedding dress is hanging in the closet, your flowers are arranged, your guests are traveling from around the world to celebrate with you. You've just closed the biggest business deal of your career, a deal worth more than $1 billion. Life is perfect. And then your phone rings. By the time that call ends, everything you thought you knew about loyalty, success, and the people you trusted most will be shattered. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build something extraordinary. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought mattered and discovered what actually did. How a single morning transformed me from a corporate executive into an entrepreneur. And how the worst betrayal of my life became the catalyst for the greatest victory I never saw coming. My name is Sarah Chen, and this is how my wedding day became the day I took control of my destiny. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first sign that my perfect life was about to implode came disguised as a routine text message. I was sitting in the burgundy leather chair at Luxe Nails on Michigan Avenue, trying to choose between 2 shades of nude polish for my wedding manicure the next day. The salon smelled like lavender and acetone, and soft jazz played through hidden speakers while Chicago's Friday afternoon traffic hummed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. I held up my left hand, examining my engagement ring against each polish. Option. The 3-carat diamond Jake had given me 18 months ago caught the afternoon light, sending tiny rainbows across my palm. Tomorrow, this hand would hold Jake's as we exchanged vows at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Tomorrow, I would become Mrs. Sarah Chen Rodriguez, and we would fly to Bali for 2 weeks of complete disconnection from the corporate world that had consumed my life for the past 12 years. That's when my phone buzzed against the marble armrest. The message was from Rebecca Martinez, my executive assistant at Grandview Hospitality Group. Rebecca had been with me for 4 years, and she knew my schedule better than I did. She knew that Friday was my wedding day. She knew I had taken the entire week off for final preparations. She knew that nothing short of a genuine emergency should reach me today. Her message read, "Sarah, urgent change to Monday's celebration. Board meeting moved to tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. James says mandatory attendance for all senior executives involved in the Serenity acquisition. No exceptions." I stared at the screen, reading the words twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. The Serenity acquisition celebration was supposed to happen Monday morning, after I returned from my honeymoon. It was meant to be a victory lap for the biggest deal in Grandview's 40-year history, the acquisition of the Serenity resort chain. 47 luxury properties spanning from the Maldives to Costa Rica, worth exactly $1 billion. I had spent the last 18 months of my life making this deal happen. 18 months of red-eye flights to remote islands, sleeping in airports when storms grounded planes, learning basic phrases in 6 different languages to connect with, family-owned resort businesses that had never trusted American corporations. I had missed birthdays, postponed vacations, and delayed my own wedding twice to see this acquisition through to completion. The contracts had been signed on Wednesday. The wire transfers were completing today. By Monday, Grandview would officially own the 3rd largest luxury resort portfolio in the world, and I would be promoted to executive vice president with a seat on the board of directors. It was the culmination of everything I had worked toward since joining the company as a junior analyst straight out of Northwestern's business school. But now, James Morrison, our CEO, wanted to move the celebration to tomorrow morning. My wedding. Morning. I typed back quickly. "Rebecca, there must be some confusion. Tomorrow is my wedding day. The celebration was scheduled for Monday specifically because of this." The response came back within 30 seconds. "I reminded James about your wedding when he called the meeting. He said the board insisted on immediate timing due to market conditions. He said to tell you, no exceptions means no exceptions." My manicurist, a petite woman named Linda, who had been doing my nails for 3 years, noticed my expression. "Everything okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile and set my phone face down on the armrest. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." But Linda was right. I did feel like I had seen a ghost. The ghost of a nagging suspicion that had been haunting me for the past 2 weeks, ever since the Serenity contracts were finalized. James Morrison had been my mentor for 12 years. He was the one who had promoted me from analyst to associate, to manager, to director, to vice president. He had been at my engagement party 8 months ago, raising a toast to Jake and me in the private dining room at Alinea. He had personally approved my extended honeymoon request and had insisted that I take 3 full weeks to decompress after the intensity of the Serenity negotiations. So why was he summoning me to a mandatory meeting 6 hours before my wedding ceremony? I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my recent text exchanges with James. Our last conversation had been Wednesday evening, right after the final Serenity signatures were collected. He had sent me a congratulatory message. "Sarah, phenomenal work on Serenity. Take the next few days to enjoy your wedding preparations. You've earned it. We'll celebrate properly when you get back." That was 48 hours ago. What had changed between Wednesday evening and Friday afternoon that required such urgent action? Linda finished applying the base coat to my nails and reached for the timeless elegance shade I had finally selected. As she worked, I found myself thinking about other small details from the past week that had felt slightly off-kilter. On Tuesday, I had stopped by the office to finalize my transition notes for the 3 weeks I would be away. When I walked past the executive conference room, I noticed James in an intense discussion with David Walsh, our chief financial officer, and a woman I didn't recognize. She was blonde, probably in her early 40s, wearing an expensive charcoal suit and taking detailed notes while James spoke. When I knocked on the conference room door to say hello, James had waved me off with an apologetic smile and mouthed, "Later." Later never came. James had left early that day for what his calendar listed as an external meeting, and I hadn't seen him since. On Wednesday morning, while waiting for the final Serenity signatures, I had tried to access the deal celebration planning folder on our shared server. The folder, which I had created and populated with vendor contacts, guest lists, and presentation materials, was no longer accessible to me. When I asked Rebecca about it, she said that James's secretary, Michelle, had taken over the event planning to lighten my load before the wedding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At the time, I had been grateful. Planning a corporate celebration while finalizing wedding details was more stress than I needed. But now, sitting in the nail salon with my phone buzzing with increasingly urgent messages, I wondered if the planning handoff had been less about helping me and more about excluding me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Maya Patel, one of the junior analysts on my acquisitions team. Maya was brilliant, ambitious, and had worked closely with me on the Serenity deal for the past 6 months. She understood the complexities of international resort acquisitions better than analysts with twice her experience. Maya's message was short but loaded with subtext. "Sarah, I know you're busy with wedding prep, but when you have a minute, can you call me? It's about the team meeting David scheduled for Monday morning." David Walsh scheduling a meeting with my team while I was on my honeymoon was unusual but not unprecedented. As CFO, David had oversight authority for all major acquisitions, and it made sense that he would want to brief the team on integration procedures for the Serenity properties. But Maya's tone suggested something more concerning. Maya was one of the most composed people I knew, someone who stayed calm during 14-hour negotiation sessions and never sent anxiety-laden messages. If she was reaching out during my wedding preparations, it meant something significant was bothering her. I decided to call her back immediately, despite Linda's gentle protest about moving my hands during the polish application. Maya answered on the first ring. "Sarah, thank you for calling. I'm sorry to bother you today." "It's fine, Maya. What's going on with David's meeting?" "That's the thing," Maya said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I was in the break room this morning when David walked by on a phone call. He was talking to someone about redundancy in the acquisitions department, now that the major deal is closed, and streamlining operations under consolidated leadership. When he saw me, he ended the call really quickly." My stomach dropped. "What else did you hear?" "He mentioned your name specifically, Sarah, and something about transition protocols and efficiency restructuring. I've been in corporate long enough to know what that language usually means." I closed my eyes, feeling the pieces of a very unpleasant puzzle beginning to form a picture I didn't want to see. Maya, who was David meeting with on Tuesday? The blonde woman in the conference room with James? I think her name is Jennifer something. I heard Michelle mention that she's from Meridian Hospitality Group. Apparently, she has extensive experience in post-acquisition integration and resort management transitions. Meridian Hospitality Group was one of our main competitors. They specialized in acquiring family-owned resort properties and rapidly converting them to standardized corporate operations. Their approach was the exact opposite of mine, where I built long-term relationships with property owners and preserved the unique character of each resort. Meridian focused on cost-cutting and operational efficiency. If James was bringing in someone from Meridian to handle post-acquisition integration, it suggested a fundamental shift in how Grandview planned to manage the Serenity properties. It also suggested that my relationship-based approach was no longer valued. "Maya," I said carefully, "I want you to document everything you remember from David's phone call. Write it down with timestamps and exact quotes if you can remember them. And if you hear anything else over the next few days, let me know immediately." "Are you worried about your job?" Maya asked directly. I looked at my reflection in the salon's mirror. My hair was styled in soft waves for tomorrow's final wedding rehearsal. My engagement ring sparkled under the bright salon lights. In less than 24 hours, I was supposed to be walking down the aisle toward the love of my life, ready to begin the next chapter of what I thought was a perfectly planned existence. "I'm worried about all of our jobs," I told Maya honestly. After ending the call, I sat in the nail salon chair feeling like the ground beneath my feet had shifted slightly. Not an earthquake, but the kind of subtle tremor that makes you question whether you felt anything at all. Linda finished my manicure with a cheerful prediction. "These nails are going to look absolutely gorgeous in your wedding photos tomorrow." I smiled and thanked her, but as I walked out onto Michigan Avenue into the crisp October afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's photos might capture something very different than the joy I had been anticipating. The Chicago streets were bustling with typical Friday afternoon energy. People hurried past carrying weekend plans and grocery bags. Tourists snapped photos of the architecture, and the familiar sounds of traffic and conversation created the urban symphony I had grown to love during my 12 years in the city. But as I walked toward my car, checking my phone every few steps for additional messages, I felt like I was moving through someone else's life. The wedding dress hanging in my closet, the flowers being arranged for tomorrow's ceremony, the guests flying in from around the world. All of it suddenly felt fragile, as if it existed in a bubble that could be popped by a single phone call. My instincts, honed by 12 years of navigating corporate politics and international business negotiations, were telling me that something was very wrong. The timing of tomorrow's meeting, the mysterious woman from Meridian, David's comments about redundancy, and James's sudden unavailability all pointed toward a scenario I didn't want to consider. But as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, I made a decision that would prove crucial in the hours to come. Instead of driving home to continue wedding preparations, I was going to spend the evening reviewing every document, contract, and communication related to the Serenity acquisition. If someone was planning to undermine me, They had picked the wrong person and definitely the wrong day to do it. Because while they might have assumed that a bride-to-be would be too distracted by wedding preparations to notice corporate maneuvering, they had forgotten one crucial detail about Sarah Chen. I hadn't built a $2.8 billion acquisition portfolio by being naive about workplace politics, and I certainly hadn't spent 18 months negotiating with some of the shrewdest business owners in the world, without learning how to recognize when someone was trying to outmaneuver me. Tomorrow might be my wedding day, but tonight was going to be about preparation for a very different kind of battle. Because if my suspicions were correct, the most important fight of my career was about to begin at 9 a.m. sharp, 6 hours before I was supposed to say, I do. As I drove through downtown Chicago toward my Lincoln Park apartment, I began mentally cataloging every asset, every relationship, and every piece of leverage I had accumulated during my years at Grandview. If someone was planning to push me out after I had delivered the biggest deal in company history, they were about to discover that Sarah Chen didn't go quietly into anyone's good night. The wedding might be tomorrow, but the real celebration was going to come later. Much later. And it was going to be entirely on my terms. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by documents that told the story of my 12-year climb through the hospitality industry. The mahogany desk that Jake had given me for my promotion to vice president was covered with contracts, correspondence, and financial reports that mapped out my professional life like a paper trail of ambition. Realized I had poured myself a glass of the Opus One wine we were saving for our anniversary and settled in to review the foundation of everything I had built at Grandview Hospitality Group. If someone was planning to tear down my career tomorrow morning, I wanted to understand exactly what they would be destroying. My personnel file made for impressive reading, even by my own standards. I had joined Grandview in 2011 as a junior analyst with a starting salary of $55,000 and a cubicle in the corner of the acquisitions department. Fresh out of Northwestern with an MBA in international business and a mountain of student loan debt, I had been one of 12 new hires that year, competing for the attention of senior executives who barely remembered our names. But I had distinguished myself quickly. My first assignment was to conduct due diligence on a small boutique hotel chain in Portugal that Grandview was considering acquiring. The deal was worth $47 million, modest by today's standards, but significant enough to make or break a junior analyst's reputation. Most of my colleagues approached due diligence as a checklist exercise, reviewing financial statements and regulatory compliance from their desks in Chicago. I had done something different. I had used my vacation days and personal savings to fly to Lisbon and spend 2 weeks visiting every property in the chain. I learned basic Portuguese, ate meals with hotel managers, and interviewed guests about their experiences. I discovered that the financial statements were technically accurate, but missed the real story of the properties. 3 of the 5 hotels were located in neighborhoods undergoing rapid gentrification, making them significantly more valuable than their current revenue suggested. More importantly, I identified a family dispute among the owners that was artificially depressing the sale price. My recommendation to move forward with the acquisition, along with my detailed cultural and market analysis, had caught the attention of James Morrison. The deal closed successfully, and the properties appreciated by 340% over the following 3 years. James promoted me to senior analyst and assigned me to increasingly complex international deals. Over the next 11 years, I had personally closed $8 billion in resort acquisitions across 4 continents. I had negotiated deals in 11 languages, learned the nuances of property law in 16 countries, and built relationships with hotel families whose businesses had been passed down through generations. I had spent Christmas in Mumbai finalizing a palace hotel acquisition, missed my father's 60th birthday to resolve a contract dispute in Bangkok, and postponed my engagement to Jake twice because of last-minute complications in deals that couldn't wait. But my crowning achievement was the Serenity Resort chain acquisition. The deal that had consumed the last 18 months of my life and would have guaranteed my promotion to executive vice president if everything went according to plan. I pulled out the thick folder containing the Serenity documentation and spread the contents across my desk. The story of this acquisition was really the story of how I had evolved from a junior analyst who traveled on her own dime to a senior executive who commanded respect from billionaire resort owners around the world. Serenity had been founded in 1987 by Alessandro Romano, an Italian businessman who had a vision of creating luxury resorts that preserved and celebrated local cultures rather than imposing standardized American hospitality concepts. Starting with a single property in Tuscany, Alessandro had spent 35 years carefully selecting locations and building relationships with local communities. Each Serenity resort was unique, reflecting the architecture, cuisine, and traditions of its location, while maintaining the highest standards of luxury and service. By 2022, Serenity owned 47 properties in 23 countries. Their portfolio included a converted monastery in the hills of Provence, overwater bungalows in the Maldives, a restored sugar plantation in Barbados, and eco-lodges in the Costa Rican rainforest. The properties generated $780 million in annual revenue and had a waiting list of ultra-high net worth individuals who booked years in advance. But Alessandro was 78 years old, and his children had chosen careers in medicine and academia rather than hospitality. He needed to find a buyer who would preserve his legacy while providing the capital and infrastructure to expand the brand globally. Most American hotel chains had approached Serenity like a traditional acquisition, focusing on cost synergies and operational efficiencies. They wanted to rebrand the properties, standardize the service protocols, and leverage economies of scale to maximize profitability. Alessandro had rejected every offer until he met me. Our first meeting had been in Rome in March of 2022. I had flown to Italy not to make a presentation, but to learn. I spent 3 days with Alessandro visiting the original Tuscan property, eating meals prepared by chefs who had been with the company for decades, and listening to stories about guests who returned year after year because they felt like family. Instead of pitching Grandview's capabilities, I asked Alessandro about his fears. What kept him awake at night when he thought about selling the company he had spent his life building? What would success look like for him in a post-acquisition world? His answers had shaped my entire approach to the deal. Alessandro didn't want to maximize the sale price. He wanted to find a partner who understood that Serenity's value came from its soul, not just its balance sheet. He wanted guarantees that local employees would be retained, that cultural traditions would be preserved, and that future expansion would follow Serenity's principles of community integration and environmental responsibility. Over the following months, I had crafted an acquisition structure that addressed every one of Alessandro's concerns. Instead of a traditional purchase agreement, we had created a partnership model that gave Grandview majority ownership while keeping Alessandro and his management team in control of brand standards and cultural integrity. We had established a $50 million fund for employee retention and community development programs. We had written environmental and cultural preservation requirements into the master agreement that would be legally binding for the next 25 years. Most importantly, I had personally guaranteed Alessandro that I would oversee the integration process for the first 2 years after closing. He had trusted me, not Grandview. Our relationship was built on dozens of conversations over 18 months, late-night phone calls when contract negotiations hit roadblocks, and face-to-face meetings in Rome, Paris, and Singapore, where we had worked through the details of preserving Serenity's unique culture within a larger corporate structure. The final agreement was a masterpiece of international business law and cultural sensitivity. It protected everything Alessandro cared about while giving Grandview access to the luxury hospitality market in ways that would have been impossible through traditional expansion. Industry analysts had called it the most innovative resort acquisition in recent history, and 3 business schools had already requested case study materials. The financial terms were equally impressive. Grandview had paid $1 billion for the Serenity portfolio but conservative projections suggested the properties would generate $18 billion in revenue over the next 5 years. The acquisition gave us immediate access to markets in Europe, Asia, and the Caribbean, where we had no existing presence, and it positioned Grandview as a legitimate competitor to Four Seasons and Ritz-Carlton in the ultra-luxury segment. But beyond the financial returns, the Serenity deal represented something more valuable: proof that American corporations could engage with international family businesses as partners rather than conquerors. It demonstrated that growth and cultural preservation weren't mutually exclusive, and it established a new model for hospitality acquisitions that prioritized long-term relationships over short-term profits. Sitting in my home office on the night before my wedding, reviewing the documentation of what I considered my life's work, I felt a mixture of pride and growing apprehension. The Serenity acquisition was the kind of deal that defined careers and created legends in the hospitality industry. It was the achievement that would have secured my promotion to executive vice president and positioned me as James Morrison's eventual successor. So why was I being summoned to a mandatory meeting 6 hours before my wedding? And why was a woman from Meridian Hospitality Group suddenly involved in discussions about my deal? I opened my laptop and logged into the Grandview internal system to review the latest communications about Monday's celebration. My access credentials still worked, which was reassuring but not necessarily meaningful. Corporate security often took several days to update system permissions, especially over weekends. I navigated to the executive calendar system and searched for tomorrow's board meeting. The meeting was listed as Serenity Integration Strategy Session, with attendance required for all senior executives, board members, and relevant external consultants. The agenda was marked as confidential, accessible only to participants. But I wasn't listed as a participant. My name appeared in the notification-only section, along with other executives who were expected to attend but hadn't been involved in planning the meeting. That distinction was subtle, but significant. In 12 years at Grandview, I had never been relegated to notification-only status for a meeting about my own deal. I clicked on the meeting details and noticed something else troubling. The meeting location was listed as Conference Room A, the executive boardroom on the 25th floor. Conference Room A was reserved for major announcements, strategic planning sessions, and meetings with external partners or investors. It wasn't the type of room you used for routine post-acquisition planning. More concerning was the list of external attendees. In addition to Jennifer from Meridian Hospitality Group, the meeting included representatives from Goldman Sachs, Grandview's primary investment bank, and Morrison & Associates, the law firm that handled our most sensitive corporate matters. Those were the types of advisors you brought in for major transactions, leadership changes, or complex restructuring initiatives. I felt my stomach tighten as the implications became clear. This wasn't a celebration of the Serenity acquisition. It was a meeting to discuss what came next, and that discussion apparently required legal and financial advisors who specialized in corporate transitions. I stood up from my desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lincoln Park. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, and I could see couples walking hand-in-hand along the lakefront paths where Jake and I had spent countless evenings planning our future together. Tomorrow night, we were supposed to be at our wedding reception, dancing to the jazz quartet we had hired and celebrating with 150 of our closest friends and family members. Instead, I was beginning to suspect that tomorrow morning would bring the end of everything I had worked to build over the past 12 years. I returned to my desk and opened the folder containing my employment contract and compensation agreements. If Grandview was planning to terminate my employment, they would need legal justification that went beyond simple restructuring. I had consistently exceeded my performance targets, brought in more revenue than any other executive in the company's history, and had no documented disciplinary actions in my personnel file. But as I reviewed the termination clauses in my contract, I discovered something I had forgotten. Section 8. 3 addressed position elimination due to strategic restructuring and specified that Grandview could eliminate any executive position if it was deemed redundant following a major acquisition or merger. The clause required 60 days written notice unless immediate implementation is necessary due to market conditions or competitive pressures. The clause had been added to my contract during my promotion to vice president 3 years ago. At the time, I had viewed it as standard corporate language that would never apply to someone in my position. But now I realized it provided exactly the legal justification Grandview would need to terminate my employment without cause. The irony was devastating. The bigger my success with the Serenity acquisition, the stronger the argument that my position was no longer necessary. If Grandview planned to integrate the Serenity properties using standardized operational procedures rather than the relationship-based approach I had pioneered, they could legitimately claim that my specialized expertise was redundant. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Patricia Williams, my personal attorney. Patricia had helped me review my employment contract when I was promoted to vice president, and she had represented me during the negotiation of my compensation package for the Serenity deal. She was also one of the few people I trusted to give me unfiltered advice about corporate legal matters. Patricia answered on the third ring, despite the late hour. "Sarah, aren't you supposed to be relaxing before your big day tomorrow?" "Patricia, I need to ask you about something confidential. If I were to be terminated tomorrow under the strategic restructuring clause in my contract, what would my legal options be?" There was a long pause. "Sarah, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble at work?" I explained the situation quickly. The mandatory meeting scheduled for 6 hours before my wedding, the mysterious consultant from Meridian, the comments Maya had overheard about redundancy in the acquisitions department. Patricia listened without interrupting, and I could hear her taking notes in the background. "Sarah," she said when I finished, "based on what you're telling me, it sounds like they're planning to terminate your employment and replace you with someone who will manage the Serenity properties differently than you intended. Can they do that legally?" "Unfortunately, yes. The strategic restructuring clause gives them broad authority to eliminate positions following major acquisitions. And if they can demonstrate that they're consolidating the acquisitions department under different leadership, they'll have adequate justification for the termination." I felt my heart sink. "So there's nothing I can do?" "I didn't say that," Patricia replied, her voice taking on the sharp edge I had heard her use during contract negotiations. "The key question is whether they're terminating you or terminating your position. If they're replacing you with someone who has essentially the same responsibilities, we could argue that this is wrongful termination disguised as restructuring. What would I need to prove that?" "Documentation. Evidence that your replacement is performing the same functions you performed, managing the same client relationships, overseeing the same types of deals. If they're simply replacing Sarah Chen with Jennifer Hartwell but keeping the Vice President of Acquisitions position intact, we'd have grounds for a wrongful termination lawsuit." I thought about the Serenity client relationships I had spent 18 months building. Alessandro Romano trusted me personally, not Grandview as an institution. The other property owners across the Serenity portfolio had signed agreements based on their confidence in my ability to preserve their local cultures and business practices. If Grandview tried to replace me with someone from Meridian, a company known for aggressive standardization and cost-cutting, those relationships could be jeopardized. "Patricia, there's something else. The Serenity acquisition agreement includes specific language about key personnel continuity. I wrote that clause myself to protect the relationships with property owners. If Grandview removes me from the account without the consent of the Serenity owners, it could be considered a breach of the master agreement." "Now that's interesting," Patricia said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Do you have a copy of that language?" I flipped through the Serenity contract until I found the relevant section. Here it is, Section 47. 3. Key personnel continuity requirement. The acquiring company agrees to maintain the employment of the primary relationship manager for all acquired properties for a minimum period of 24 months post-closing, unless mutually agreed upon in writing by all parties. Sarah, that's not just an employment protection clause. That's a deal protection clause. If they fire you within 24 months of closing, they could void the entire acquisition agreement. I felt a spark of hope for the first time all evening. What does that mean practically? It means that if they terminate you tomorrow, you wouldn't just have grounds for wrongful termination. You'd have grounds to claim that they're breaching their contract with Serenity, which could give you leverage to demand reinstatement or negotiate a much more favorable severance package. I looked at the contract again, focusing on the language I had insisted on during the final negotiations. At the time, I had written the clause to protect my team and ensure stability during the integration process. I had never imagined it might end up protecting me from my own company. Patricia, if they proceed with terminating me tomorrow, what should I do? Document everything. Record the meeting if possible. Get copies of any termination paperwork they give you. And don't sign anything without calling me first. If they're really planning to fire you 6 hours before your wedding, they're either desperate or arrogant. Either way, they're probably making mistakes we can use to your advantage. After ending the call with Patricia, I sat in my home office, feeling like I was preparing for war rather than a wedding. My beautiful engagement ring caught the light from my desk lamp, reminding me that in less than 18 hours, I was supposed to be dancing with Jake at our reception, celebrating the beginning of our life together as husband and wife. Instead, I was strategizing about wrongful termination lawsuits and contract breaches. I was reviewing documentation that might protect me from colleagues I had trusted for over a decade. I was preparing for the possibility that the career I had spent 12 years building might end tomorrow morning in a conference room with people who had forgotten everything I had contributed to their success. But as I organized the documents on my desk and prepared for whatever tomorrow would bring, I felt something unexpected alongside the anxiety and betrayal. I felt a cold, clear determination that I hadn't experienced since my early days as a junior analyst fighting to prove myself in a company that barely knew my name. If James Morrison and David Walsh thought they could discard me like an outdated business strategy, they were about to learn something important about Sarah Chen. I hadn't built a $2.8 billion acquisition portfolio by backing down from fights, and I certainly hadn't spent 18 months negotiating with some of the most sophisticated business owners in the world without learning how to protect my interests. Tomorrow might be my wedding day, but it was also going to be the day I discovered exactly who my real allies were and exactly how much fight I had left in me. Because while they might have planned this ambush for maximum emotional impact, they had forgotten one crucial detail about the woman they were targeting. I had been preparing for this moment my entire career, even if I hadn't realized it until tonight. Part 3. The first exclusion. The morning of my wedding dawned gray and drizzly, with the kind of October weather that makes Chicago feel like it's perpetually deciding between autumn and winter. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. after 3 hours of restless sleep, my mind immediately focusing on the confrontation that awaited me in 3.5 hours, rather than the celebration that was supposed to begin that afternoon. Jake was still sleeping beside me, one arm draped across the pillow where my head had been tossing and turning all night. He looked peaceful, completely unaware that our wedding day was about to be overshadowed by corporate warfare. I had decided not to tell him about my suspicions until after the morning meeting. There was no point in ruining his sleep over something that might turn out to be an overreaction on my part, though my instincts told me otherwise. I slipped out of bed quietly and made my way to the kitchen, where I started a pot of coffee and tried to organize my thoughts for the day ahead. The original plan had been simple and perfect. Hair appointment at 10 a.m., makeup at noon, photos at 1 p.m., ceremony at 3 p.m. at the Chicago Botanic Garden, followed by cocktails and dinner at the Drake Hotel. Our flight to Bali was scheduled for Sunday morning, giving us a full day to recover from the celebration before beginning our 3-week honeymoon. Now I was facing a mandatory board meeting at 9 a.m. that could potentially upend everything I had worked for over the past 12 years. I had to get through whatever they had planned, defend my position if necessary, and still somehow transition into being a radiant bride by mid-morning. The logistics alone seemed impossible, never mind the emotional complexity of switching from corporate warrior to blushing bride in a matter of hours. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Sarah, I'm so sorry about the timing of this meeting." I tried to push back, but James was insistent. "Everyone will understand if you need to keep it brief because of your wedding." I typed back, "Thanks, Rebecca. See you at 9. But even as I sent the message, I wondered if Rebecca's apology was genuine, or if she was already positioning herself for whatever came next. In corporate environments, loyalty often evaporated quickly when power structures shifted, and administrative assistants were usually the first to sense changes in the political winds. I spent the next hour reviewing my notes from the previous evening and mentally rehearsing responses to various scenarios I might encounter at the meeting. If they were indeed planning to terminate my employment, I wanted to be prepared with specific questions about the reasoning, the timeline, and the implications for my existing projects. I also wanted to understand how they planned to manage the Serenity relationship transition without violating the key personnel continuity clause I had written into the contract. At 7 a.m., I received an unexpected phone call from Maya. She sounded nervous and was clearly calling from her personal cell phone rather than going through the office system. "Sarah, I hope it's okay that I'm calling you this early. I know you have your wedding today, but I found out something last night that I think you need to know before your meeting this morning." "What did you find out?" "I was working late yesterday, and I overheard a conversation between David and Jennifer, the woman from Meridian. They were in the conference room discussing integration timelines for the Serenity properties. Jennifer was saying something about how family-owned resort businesses are typically overmanaged, and that most of the existing relationships could be streamlined through standardized communication protocols. My stomach clenched. Standardized communication protocols were corporate speak for replacing personal relationships with form letters and automated systems. It was exactly the opposite of the approach that had made the Serenity acquisition possible in the first place. "What else did you hear?" David mentioned that they wanted to implement the new management structure immediately to avoid any confusion during the transition period. Jennifer said something about how emotional attachments between executives and clients could complicate necessary business decisions. Emotional attachments. That was how they were characterizing the 18 months I had spent building trust with Alessandro Romano and the other Serenity property owners. Relationships that had made a $1 billion deal possible were now being dismissed as emotional. Complications that interfered with business efficiency. "Maya, I need you to do something for me. Can you document everything you remember from that conversation? Exact quotes if possible, along with the time and location where you heard it." "Of course. Sarah, are you worried they're going to try to push you out?" I looked out my kitchen window at the gray Chicago morning, watching early commuters hurry past under umbrellas and thinking about how much could change in a single day. I'm worried they've already decided to push me out. The meeting this morning might just be their way of making it official. After ending the call with Maya, I spent another hour preparing for the confrontation ahead. I printed copies of the key personnel continuity clause from the Serenity contract, along with documentation of my role in developing and closing the deal. I also prepared a list of questions about the integration timeline and management structure that would force them to be specific about their plans for replacing me. At 8:15 a.m., I was getting dressed in a navy blue suit that struck the right balance between professional authority and respectful formality. I chose pearl earrings and my grandmother's gold watch, pieces that made me feel connected to the strong women who had come before me and who had faced their own battles with grace and determination. Jake woke up just as I was finishing my makeup. He sat up in bed, looking confused about why I was dressed for business rather than preparing for our wedding. "Babe, why are you in a suit? Aren't you supposed to be at the salon getting your hair done?" I sat down on the edge of the bed and took his hand. James called a mandatory board meeting for this morning. Something about urgent Serenity integration issues that can't wait until Monday. I should be back by 10:30 at the latest, which gives us plenty of time to get back on schedule. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "They called a mandatory meeting on your wedding day? That seems incredibly inconsiderate, even for corporate executives." That's what I thought too, but James said it was non-negotiable, so I need to make an appearance and then get out of there as quickly as possible. Jake studied my face carefully. He had known me for 6 years, and he could read my moods better than anyone. "Sarah, you look like you're preparing for battle, not a quick business meeting. What aren't you telling me?" I hesitated, torn between my desire to protect him from unnecessary worry and my need to be honest about what I was facing. "I think there might be some politics involved with this meeting. Some decisions about the direction of the Serenity integration that could affect my role going forward." "On your wedding day?" "I know, the timing is terrible. But if there are changes coming, I'd rather know about them now than spend our honeymoon wondering what I'm returning to." Jake squeezed my hand. "Do you want me to come with you? I could wait in the lobby or something, just in case you need support afterward." The offer was tempting, but I knew that bringing my fiancé to a corporate confrontation would send the wrong message about my professionalism and emotional stability. "I'll be fine. This is just business, and I know how to handle business." But even as I said the words, I wasn't entirely convinced they were true. This felt different from normal corporate politics. The timing, the secrecy, the involvement of external consultants, everything suggested a level of premeditation that went beyond routine business decisions. I kissed Jake goodbye and drove through downtown Chicago toward the Grandview building, listening to news radio and trying to stay calm. The morning traffic was lighter than usual because of the early hour, and I arrived at the office with 15 minutes to spare before the 9 a.m. meeting. The Grandview building was a gleaming tower of steel and glass in the heart of the financial district, 30 floors of corporate ambition reaching toward the Chicago sky. I had walked through its revolving doors thousands of times over the past 12 years, but this morning felt different. This morning, I was entering as someone whose future with the company was uncertain. I took the elevator to the 25th floor, where the executive offices and conference rooms were located. The hallways were quieter than usual for a Friday morning, with most of the administrative staff apparently not yet arrived for the day. I noticed that the lights were already on in conference room A, and through the frosted glass walls, I could see several figures moving around inside. I stopped at my office first to drop off my purse and collect my thoughts. My nameplate still read, Sarah Chen, Vice President of Acquisitions, in elegant gold lettering against a black background. The office itself looked exactly as I had left it on Tuesday. Files organized on my desk, family photos on the credenza, the bottle of champagne Alessandro Romano had sent me after the Serenity contracts were signed, still sitting unopened on my bookshelf. Everything looked normal, but something felt fundamentally different. It was like returning to a childhood home that had been redecorated while you were away. The furniture was in the same places, but the emotional geography had shifted in ways you couldn't quite articulate. I gathered my notes and documentation and walked toward conference room A. Through the glass walls, I could now see that the meeting was already in progress, even though it wasn't scheduled to begin for another 5 minutes. James Morrison was at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly while speaking to the group. David Walsh sat to his right, reviewing documents that I couldn't see from the hallway. Jennifer from Meridian was positioned directly across from David, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. But what struck me most was the presence of two people I hadn't expected. Margaret Thompson, the chairwoman of Grandview's board of directors, and Robert Carlyle, the company's chief legal officer. Margaret rarely attended operational meetings, and Robert was typically only involved in discussions that had significant legal implications. As I approached the conference room door, I realized that this wasn't going to be a routine integration planning session. This was going to be a formal proceeding with board oversight and legal representation. The kind of meeting where careers were made or destroyed with parliamentary precision. I knocked on the glass door and entered when James gestured for me to come in. The conversation stopped immediately, and everyone turned to look at me with expressions that ranged from professionally neutral to subtly sympathetic. It felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided, but the formalities still needed to be observed. "Sarah, thank you for joining us," James said, standing up to shake my hand. "I know the timing is challenging with your wedding this afternoon, but we appreciate you making this a priority." I shook his hand and took the seat he indicated, which I noticed was positioned at the far end of the table from the other executives. Not exactly the power position you'd expect for someone whose deal was being celebrated. "Of course," I replied. "I'm always available when the company needs me." James smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's exactly the kind of dedication that has made you such a valuable member of our team over the years." The use of past tense wasn't lost on me. Valuable member over the years, not valuable member of our team. In corporate speak, that subtle shift in language was often the first signal that someone's time was coming to an end. Margaret Thompson cleared her throat and opened a folder in front of her. "Sarah, we've asked you here this morning to discuss some strategic changes in how we'll be managing the Serenity acquisition going forward." I nodded and pulled out my notepad, pen ready. "I'm eager to hear about the integration plans. Alessandro and the other property owners have been asking about next steps, and I want to make sure we're meeting their expectations." David Walsh shifted in his seat. "Actually, Sarah, that's part of what we need to discuss. The board has decided to restructure our approach to post-acquisition management with a focus on operational efficiency and standardized procedures." "What does that mean specifically?" Jennifer from Meridian spoke for the first time since I'd entered the room. "It means transitioning from relationship-based management to systems-based management. Individual client relationships, while valuable during the acquisition phase, can become inefficient during the integration phase when we need to implement consistent policies across multiple properties." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "Jennifer, the relationships I've built with the Serenity property owners aren't just valuable during acquisition. They're the foundation of the entire deal. These are family businesses that have never worked with American corporations before. The trust we've established is what made the acquisition possible, and it's what will make the integration successful." "That's certainly one perspective," she replied, her tone diplomatically condescending. "But our analysis suggests that most of those relationships can be maintained through professional account management, rather than executive-level personal involvement." Professional account management. In other words, replace Sarah Chen with a junior account manager and a standardized communication protocol. Take relationships that had taken 18 months to build and reduce them to quarterly business reviews and annual strategy sessions. I looked around the table, studying the faces of people I had worked with for over a decade. Margaret Thompson maintained her neutral board member expression. Robert Carlyle was focused intently on the legal documents in front of him. David Walsh was checking his phone, as if this conversation was a routine matter that didn't require his full attention. But James Morrison was watching me carefully, and I could see something in his expression that looked almost like regret. Not regret about the decision they were making, but regret about the timing and circumstances of how they were making it. "James," I said, addressing him directly, "help me understand what's driving these changes. 3 days ago, you were congratulating me on closing the biggest deal in company history. Today, you're telling me that the approach that made that deal possible is now considered inefficient. What changed? James glanced at Margaret Thompson before answering. Sarah, nothing has changed about our appreciation for your accomplishments. But the board has decided that as we move into the integration phase, we need management strategies that can scale across our entire portfolio, not just the Serenity properties. And those strategies don't include the executive who spent 18 months building the relationships that made the acquisition possible. The silence that followed my question lasted about 10 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Everyone at the table was looking either at their papers or at some point on the wall behind my head. No one was looking at me. Finally, Margaret Thompson spoke. Sarah, we've made the decision to consolidate the acquisitions department under David's direct oversight, with Jennifer joining us as Vice President of Integration and Asset Management. Vice President of Integration and Asset Management. A title that encompassed everything I had been doing, but with language that emphasized systems and processes rather than relationships and cultural sensitivity. Are you eliminating my position? I asked directly. Robert Carlyle looked up from his legal documents for the first time since I'd entered the room. We're restructuring the department to better align with our strategic priorities going forward. That was lawyer speak for, yes, we're eliminating your position, but we're going to phrase it in a way that protects us from wrongful termination. Claims. I set down my pen and looked around the table one more time. Let me make sure I understand what's happening here. You're firing me 6 hours before my wedding, immediately after I closed a $1 billion acquisition, and you're replacing me with someone whose company is known for dismantling exactly the types of relationships that made this deal possible. James shifted uncomfortably. Sarah, we're not firing you. We're restructuring the department. With all due respect, James, that's exactly what firing means. You're eliminating my position and replacing me with someone else. The fact that you're calling it restructuring doesn't change the reality of what's happening. I could feel my professional composure beginning to crack, but I was determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. If they were going to destroy my career on my wedding day, I was going to face it with dignity. Margaret Thompson opened another folder and slid a document across the table to me. Sarah, we've prepared a comprehensive severance package that reflects our appreciation for your contributions to the company. We think you'll find the terms quite generous. I looked at the document without picking it up. The first page was a termination agreement with my name already typed in the appropriate spaces. They had prepared this before the meeting even began. This wasn't a discussion about strategic changes. It was a termination proceeding disguised as a business meeting. How long have you been planning this? I asked. No one answered. When did you decide that my position was redundant? Before or after I closed the Serenity deal? Still no answer. I stood up from my chair, leaving the termination agreement on the table. I need some time to review this with my attorney before I sign anything. Robert Carlyle spoke up quickly. Of course, you have until close of business today to review the terms and return the signed agreement. Close of business today. My wedding day. They wanted me to sign away my career on the same day I was supposed to be celebrating the beginning of my marriage. I gathered my notes and walked toward the door, but before I left, I turned back to address the room one final time. I hope you all understand what you're risking with this decision. The Serenity property owners trusted me, not Grandview. They've never worked with American corporations before, and they're going to be very concerned about maintaining continuity in their business relationships. When Alessandro Romano discovers that the person he negotiated with for 18 months is no longer involved in managing his properties, he's going to have questions that Jennifer might not be prepared to answer. The room remained silent as I finished speaking. I could see James Morrison's jaw tighten slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. Margaret Thompson was writing notes on her legal pad, probably documenting my response for the official record. David Walsh had stopped checking his phone and was now paying full attention to the conversation, perhaps recognizing for the first time that this termination might have complications they hadn't anticipated. Jennifer from Meridian finally spoke up, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had clearly been briefed on how to handle this exact concern. "Sarah, I appreciate your dedication to the client relationships you've built, but I think you're underestimating the professionalism of the Serenity property owners. They're sophisticated business people who understand that personnel changes are a normal part of corporate operations. With proper transition management, I'm confident we can maintain those relationships without significant disruption." I almost laughed at the naivety of her response. Jennifer was approaching this like a typical corporate acquisition, where you could replace one account manager with another and expect business to continue as usual. But the Serenity deal wasn't typical, and Alessandro Romano wasn't a typical client. "Jennifer, with respect, you've never met Alessandro Romano. You've never sat with him in his villa in Tuscany while he explained why his father taught him never to trust American corporations. You've never spent 3 hours over dinner in Rome listening to him describe how previous hotel chains had approached his family with promises they never kept. The only reason he agreed to work with Grandview was because he trusted me personally, to protect everything he had spent his life building." Jennifer's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Maybe she was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to be as straightforward as standardizing operational procedures and implementing corporate communication protocols. Robert Carlyle cleared his throat, apparently deciding that the conversation was veering into territory that could create legal complications for the company. "Sarah, we understand your concerns about client relationships, and we're committed to ensuring a smooth transition that protects all of our business interests. But the decision about departmental restructuring has been made, and we need to focus on implementation rather than relitigating the strategic rationale." Implementation rather than relitigating. In other words, shut up and sign the termination agreement. I looked at my watch. It was 9:47 a.m. In exactly 5 hours and 13 minutes, I was supposed to be walking down the aisle at the Chicago Botanic Garden to marry the man I loved. My hair appointment was scheduled to begin in 73 minutes. My wedding photographer would be arriving at our apartment in 3 hours to begin capturing what was supposed to be the most joyful day of my life. But instead of focusing on becoming a bride, I was standing in a corporate conference room defending my professional reputation against people who had apparently forgotten that I was the reason they had a $1 billion acquisition to celebrate in the first place. "I need to go," I said simply. "I have a wedding to attend." James Morrison stood up as I reached for the door handle. "Sarah, I want you to know that this decision doesn't reflect any dissatisfaction with your performance. You've been an exceptional executive, and we're grateful for everything you've contributed to Grandview's success." I turned back to face him, studying his expression carefully. James had been my mentor for 12 years. He had promoted me, supported my career development, and celebrated my successes as if they were his own. But he was also a corporate executive who understood that business decisions sometimes required personal sacrifices. "James, if you were truly grateful for my contributions, you wouldn't be firing me 6 hours before my wedding. You would have had this conversation last week or next month, or at any time that didn't deliberately coincide with the most important personal milestone of my life." His face reddened slightly, but he maintained eye contact. The timing was driven by business necessities, not personal considerations. What business necessities required this decision to be made today? He glanced at Margaret Thompson before answering. Market conditions and competitive pressures that made immediate implementation necessary. It was the exact language from the termination clause in my employment contract. They were following a script that had been prepared by lawyers to justify immediate termination without the standard 60-day notice period. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, I hope those market conditions and competitive pressures are worth the relationships you're about to lose. I walked out of conference room A and made my way back to my office, my heels clicking against the polished marble floors with a sharpness that seemed to echo through the empty hallways. The executive floor was still quiet, with most of the administrative staff not yet arrived for the day. I felt like I was moving through a ghost building, surrounded by the remnants of a career that was ending before I had fully processed what was happening. In my office, I sat down at my desk and stared at the termination agreement I had left behind in the conference room. They wanted me to sign away 12 years of my professional life by close of business today, which meant I had approximately 8 hours to decide whether to accept their severance package or fight the termination through legal channels. 8 hours that were supposed to be devoted to getting married. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Williams, my attorney. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting for my call. "Sarah, how did the meeting go?" "Exactly as we suspected. They're terminating my position effective immediately and replacing me with someone from Meridian Hospitality. They want me to sign the severance agreement by end of business today. On your wedding day." "On my wedding day." Patricia was quiet for a moment, probably taking notes and formulating legal strategy. "What reason did they give for the immediate termination?" "Market conditions and competitive pressures that made immediate implementation necessary." Direct quote from the termination clause in my contract. "Did they provide any specific examples of these market conditions or competitive pressures?" "No. It was clearly scripted language designed to meet the legal requirements for immediate termination." "Sarah, I want you to do something for me. Don't sign anything today. Tell them you need additional time to review the agreement with legal counsel. Most companies will grant a reasonable extension for legal review, especially when the termination is unexpected." "What if they refuse?" "Then we'll know they're operating in bad faith, which will strengthen our case if we decide to challenge the termination. But my guess is they'll agree to an extension rather than risk appearing unreasonable." I looked out my office window, at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the 12 years I had spent climbing the corporate ladder that now seemed to be crumbling beneath my feet. "Patricia, do you think I have a case?" "Based on what you've told me, yes. The timing is suspicious, the justification is vague, and the key personnel continuity clause in the Serenity contract gives us significant leverage. But I need to review all the documentation before I can give you a definitive assessment. How long would a legal challenge take?" Wrongful termination cases typically take 18 to 24 months to resolve, assuming they don't settle earlier. But Sarah, there's something else to consider. Do you really want to spend the next 2 years of your life fighting your former employer, or would you rather focus on building something new? It was a question I hadn't expected, but it forced me to think about what I actually wanted beyond just defending my reputation. Did I want to return to Grandview after they had demonstrated such callous disregard for my contributions and such poor judgment about the timing of my termination? Did I want to work for people who viewed 18 months of relationship building as an inefficient emotional attachment? I don't know, I admitted. Right now, I'm too angry to think clearly about long-term strategy. That's understandable. But Sarah, I want you to consider something. You've just closed the biggest deal in your company's history. You have relationships with resort owners around the world who trust you personally. You have expertise in international hospitality acquisitions that very few people possess. Maybe this termination isn't the end of your career. Maybe it's the beginning of something better. The idea of starting my own firm had occurred to me during my sleepless night, but I had dismissed it as a fantasy born of anger and frustration. Now, hearing it suggested by my attorney as a serious possibility, I began to consider what that might actually look like. Patricia, how quickly could I establish my own acquisitions firm? With your track record and relationships, you could probably secure initial funding within 60 to 90 days. The bigger question is whether you'd be able to work with your existing clients while you're still technically employed by Grandview. even if that employment is ending. What do you mean? Non-compete clauses, client poaching restrictions, confidentiality agreements. Most senior executives have contractual limitations on their ability to immediately compete with their former employers. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a copy of my employment contract, flipping to the sections that addressed post-employment restrictions. I had negotiated these clauses carefully when I was promoted to vice president, understanding that they could significantly impact my career flexibility. My non-compete is limited to direct solicitation of Grandview clients for new business, I read aloud. But it doesn't restrict me from working with clients who seek me out independently or from providing consulting services that don't directly compete with Grandview's core business. That's unusually favorable language. Most non-competes are much more restrictive. I insisted on the flexibility because I knew that in the hospitality industry, relationships often transcend corporate boundaries. I wanted to be able to maintain professional relationships even if I left the company. It sounds like you were already thinking about this possibility, even if you didn't realize it at the time. Maybe I had been. Maybe some part of me had always known that my approach to business relationships was fundamentally different from Grandview's corporate culture, and that eventually that difference would create conflict. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. How did the meeting go? Are you on your way to the salon? I stared at the message, realizing that I hadn't given any thought to the practical logistics of proceeding with my wedding after what had just happened. How do you transition from being fired to being a radiant bride? How do you celebrate the beginning of your marriage when your career has just been demolished? I typed back, Meeting went longer than expected. We'll call you in a few minutes. But before I called Jake, I needed to make another call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Alessandro Romano's number. It was mid-afternoon in Italy, which meant he would probably be available to talk. Alessandro answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the warmth and enthusiasm I had come to associate with our conversations over the past 18 months. Sarah, Mia cara, how wonderful to hear from you on your wedding day. I was just telling Francesca that we should send flowers to your ceremony. Alessandro, thank you for thinking of us. Actually, I'm calling because there's been a development at Grandview that I wanted you to hear about directly from me. His tone immediately became more serious. What kind of development? The company has decided to restructure the acquisitions department. Effective immediately, I will no longer be managing the Serenity account. They're bringing in someone new to handle the integration process. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Alessandro finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. They are removing you from our account? The woman who spent 18 months earning our trust and understanding our business? Yes. They believe that standardized management procedures will be more efficient than relationship-based management. Standardized management procedures. Alessandro repeated, his Italian accent making the corporate jargon sound even more ridiculous. Sarah, this is exactly what I feared would happen once we signed the contracts. They used you to gain our trust, and now they are discarding you. Like you are expendable. Alessandro, I want you to know that this wasn't my choice. I fought to maintain our relationship, but the decision was made above my level. Of course it was not your choice. You have integrity, which is why we trusted you. But Sarah, I must tell you something. This changes everything for us. The other property owners and we did not sign contracts with Grandview. We signed contracts with Sarah Chen. If Sarah Chen is no longer representing Grandview, then we need to reconsider our position. My heart started beating faster. What do you mean? I mean that we will need to review our agreements very carefully to understand what options we have. We trusted you, not your company. If your company does not value that trust, perhaps we should explore other arrangements. I thought about the key personnel continuity clause I had written into the contract specifically to prevent this type of situation. Alessandro, there may be contractual protections that give you leverage in this situation. I would recommend having your attorneys review Section 47, 3 of the Master Agreement. We will certainly do that. But Sarah, I have a more important question for you. What are your plans now? I'm not sure yet. This just happened this morning. Well, when you decide what you want to do next, you should know that you have friends who would be very interested in working with you. Whatever your next venture may be. After ending the call with Alessandro, I sat in my office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet in ways that had nothing to do with being terminated. If the Serenity property owners were questioning their agreements with Grandview because of my departure, then this wasn't just about my career. This was about the stability of a $1 billion acquisition that was supposed to be the crown jewel of Grandview's portfolio. I called Maya to get her perspective on what might be happening behind the scenes. Maya, it's Sarah. The meeting this morning confirmed our suspicions. They're eliminating my position and bringing in Jennifer from Meridian to manage the Serenity. Integration. I was afraid of that. Sarah, there's something else you should know. Right after you left the building, David Walsh called an emergency meeting with the entire acquisitions team. He told us that there would be significant changes in department structure and that everyone should be prepared for new reporting relationships. Did he mention me specifically? He said that you had decided to pursue other opportunities and that we should direct all client communications to him or Jennifer going forward. He made it sound like your departure was voluntary and amicable. Voluntary and amicable. They were already rewriting the narrative to make it seem like I had chosen to leave rather than being forced out on my wedding day. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If I were to start my own acquisitions firm, would you be interested in joining me? There was no hesitation in her response. Absolutely. Sarah, half the team has been talking about what we would do if you left the company. Everyone knows that you're the reason most of our clients choose to work with us. Without you, this department is just going to become another corporate acquisition machine. It would mean leaving Grandview and starting over with no guaranteed income while we build the business. I understand that. But working for someone who would fire you on your wedding day isn't exactly job security either. After ending the call with Maya, I realized that what had started as a personal betrayal was beginning to look like a business opportunity. If the Serenity property owners were questioning their relationship with Grandview, and if my team members were interested in working with me independently, then maybe this termination was creating possibilities I hadn't considered. But first, I had to get through my wedding day. I looked at my watch. It was 10:35 a.m. My hair appointment had started 5 minutes ago, and I was sitting in my office contemplating wrongful termination lawsuits and the logistics of starting a competing business. I needed to make a decision about how to proceed because I couldn't simultaneously fight a corporate battle and get married with the grace and joy that Jake deserved. I picked up my phone and called Jake. "Babe, please tell me you're on your way to the salon," he said when he answered. "Jake, I need to tell you what happened at the meeting this morning." I explained the situation quickly, trying to keep my voice steady and factual rather than emotional. Jake listened without interrupting, and I could hear him moving around our apartment, probably pacing the way he did when he was processing difficult information. "They fired you on our wedding day," he said when I finished. "Yes." 6 hours before our ceremony. "Yes." "After you just closed the biggest deal in company history." "Yes." Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone I had rarely heard from him. Cold, controlled anger. "Sarah, I want you to listen. To me, very carefully. We are going to have the most beautiful wedding ceremony this afternoon, surrounded by everyone we love. We are going to celebrate our marriage with joy and gratitude and absolute presence in the moment. And then, When we get back from our honeymoon, we are going to destroy the careers of everyone who thought they could treat you this way." I felt tears welling up in my eyes for the first time since the meeting had ended. Not tears of sadness or defeat, but tears of gratitude for marrying a man who understood exactly what I needed to hear. "Are you sure you want to proceed with the wedding? We could postpone?" "Absolutely not," Jake interrupted. "Sarah, these people have already taken your job. They are not taking your wedding day. Get to the salon right now. I'll handle everything. Else until it's time for you to put on your wedding dress." "What do you mean you'll handle everything else?" "I mean I'm calling Patricia Williams to discuss legal strategy. I'm calling your parents to let them know there might be some tension today, but that everything is under control. And I'm calling the hotel to make sure our honeymoon suite has a business center, because apparently we're going to be doing some planning during our first few days in Bali." I laughed, despite everything that had happened. "You want to spend our honeymoon planning my new business?" "I want to spend our honeymoon planning our future. And if that future includes you starting your own firm and showing these idiots what they just threw away, then yes, that's exactly how I want to spend our honeymoon." First Actor Part 4, The Trusted Ally's Warning. By the time I arrived at Bella Salon on Oak Street, I was already 45 minutes late for my hair appointment. The salon was a temple of pre-wedding preparation, with soft music, expensive candles, and the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were ready for their close-up. Under normal circumstances, this would have been one of the most relaxing and enjoyable parts of my wedding day preparation. Instead, I felt like an actress who had learned her lines for the wrong play. My stylist, Carmen, had been doing hair for Chicago brides for 15 years, and she took one look at my face and immediately understood that this wasn't going to be a typical appointment. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened? Between now and yesterday when we did your trial run?" I settled into the styling chair and caught my eye in the mirror. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had been fired 6 hours before her wedding and was now trying to transform herself into a radiant bride through sheer force of will. "Work drama," I said simply. "The kind of day that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people you trust." Carmen began working on my hair with the efficiency of someone who had talked many brides through pre-wedding crises over the years. "Want to talk about it? Or would you prefer to focus on getting you ready to marry that gorgeous man of yours?" I was tempted to unload the entire story on Carmen, but I realized that talking about corporate betrayal while getting my hair done for my wedding would only make the situation feel more surreal. Instead, I decided to use the time to think strategically about my next moves. While Carmen worked her magic with hot rollers and bobby pins, I used my phone to research Jennifer Hartwell's background at Meridian Hospitality Group. What I found confirmed my worst fears about Grandview's new direction. Jennifer had spent the last 8 years at Meridian, where she specialized in what they called asset optimization of newly acquired properties. In practice, this meant standardizing operations, reducing staff, eliminating local suppliers, and converting unique properties into cookie-cutter versions of corporate hospitality brands. She had overseen the integration of 43 hotel acquisitions, and in every case, the properties had lost their distinctive character within 6 months of her involvement. More troubling was her track record with family-owned businesses. 3 separate news articles described situations where family owners had sued Meridian for breach of contract after Jennifer's integration processes violated promises that had been made during the acquisition negotiations. In each case, Meridian had settled out of court, but the property owners had publicly criticized the company for bait-and-switch tactics that used relationship-focused executives during negotiations and then replaced them with cost-focused managers during implementation. This was exactly what Grandview was now doing with the Serenity acquisition. They had used my relationship-building approach to close the deal, and now they were replacing me with someone whose specialty was dismantling the very relationships that had made the acquisition possible. I was so absorbed in my research that I didn't notice my phone buzzing with an incoming call until Carmen pointed it out. "Sarah, Your phone has been ringing for the past minute. I looked at the screen and saw Alessandro Romano's name. He was calling back less than 2 hours after our previous conversation, which suggested that he had been doing research of his own. Alessandro, good afternoon. Sarah, I have been making phone calls since we spoke this morning. I wanted you to know what we have learned. Carmen continued working on my hair while I listened to Alessandro's report. His voice carried the controlled anger of a businessman who had discovered he was being manipulated. First, I spoke with Marco in Provence and Elena in Costa Rica. They received emails this morning from someone named Jennifer Hartwell, introducing herself as their new account manager and requesting immediate meetings to discuss operational alignments for their properties. My stomach dropped. Jennifer was already reaching out to the property owners before they had even been officially notified of my departure. It was the kind of aggressive move that prioritized corporate efficiency over relationship maintenance. What was their reaction? Marco was confused because he thought you were his contact. Elena was concerned because the email mentioned reviewing staffing levels and supplier relationships, which sounds like preparation for cost-cutting measures. Both of them called me to ask what was happening. What did you tell them? I told them the truth. That Grandview has removed you from our account and replaced you with someone whose background suggests a very different approach to property management than what we agreed to during our negotiations. Alessandro paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. When he continued, his voice was grimmer. Sarah, we also had our attorneys review the key personnel continuity clause you mentioned. They believe we have grounds to challenge any management changes that violate the spirit of our agreement. But more importantly, they discovered something interesting about the termination timing. What did they discover? The master agreement specifies that any changes to key personnel must be communicated to the property owners at least 30 days in advance, unless there are extraordinary circumstances that require immediate action. Did Grandview provide 30 days' notice to anyone? I thought about the timeline of events. The Serenity contracts had been signed on Wednesday. I had been terminated on Friday. If they had been planning this change for 30 days, they would have known about it during the final contract negotiations. No, I said. The decision was presented to me as immediate and driven by urgent business necessities. Then they are in violation of the agreement. Unless they can demonstrate extraordinary circumstances that required immediate action, they cannot legally remove you from our account without proper notice. Carmen caught my eye in the mirror and raised her eyebrows, clearly intrigued by the business drama unfolding while she styled my wedding hair. I gave her an apologetic smile and continued the conversation. Alessandro, what are you planning to do with this information? We are planning to send a formal letter to Grandview's board of directors, copied to their legal counsel, demanding clarification of the extraordinary circumstances that justified violating the personnel continuity clause. We are also requesting immediate reinstatement of you as our account manager, or alternatively, the right to exit our agreements without penalty. The right to exit their agreements without penalty. If the Serenity property owners exercised that option, it would unwind the entire $1 billion acquisition and potentially destroy Grandview's reputation in the international hospitality market. Alessandro, I appreciate your support, but I don't want you to take actions that could harm your business interests just to defend my employment situation. Sarah, this is not about defending your employment. This is about protecting our business interests. We signed contracts based on explicit promises about how our properties would be managed. If Grandview cannot honor those promises, then we need to protect ourselves from further violations. What timeline are you thinking about for this letter? We will send it Monday morning with a copy to the hospitality trade press. If Grandview wants to avoid public scrutiny of their contract compliance, they will need to respond quickly and substantively. Monday morning, 3 days after my termination, but still within the window where remedial action might be possible. If the Serenity property owners went public with accusations of contract violations, it would create exactly the kind of reputational crisis that boards of directors hated to manage. Alessandro, there's something else I need to tell you. I'm considering starting my own acquisitions firm. If that happens, would you be interested in working with me on future projects? Sarah, I will be very direct with you. If you start your own firm, we would prefer to work with you rather than continue with Grandview. You understand our business, you respect our values, and you have proven that your word is reliable. Those are the qualities we need in a business partner. After ending the call with Alessandro, I realized that my termination was creating complications that extended far beyond my personal career situation. If the Serenity property owners withdrew from their agreements with Grandview, it would represent one of the largest acquisition failures in hospitality industry history. The financial consequences would be devastating, but the reputational damage would be even worse. Carmen was putting the finishing touches on my hairstyle, creating an elegant updo that would be perfect for my wedding photos. She had been listening to my conversation with obvious fascination, and now she spoke up with the directness of someone who had seen many dramatic situations over the years. Honey, I don't know much about business, but it sounds like these people picked the wrong woman to mess with. If you've got billion-dollar clients threatening to walk away because of how they treated you, then you've got power they didn't expect you to have. She was right. In their eagerness to replace relationship-based management with systems-based management, Grandview had overlooked a crucial factor. The relationships belonged to me, not to the company. I had spent 18 months building personal trust with property owners who had never worked with American corporations before. That trust couldn't be transferred to Jennifer Hartwell with an email introduction and a corporate reorganization announcement. Carmen, can I ask you something? If someone treated you badly at work, would you rather fight to get your old job back? Or would you rather start your own salon and take your best clients with you? Carmen smiled while she applied hairspray to my finished hairstyle. Honey, I did start my own salon. Used to work for a chain that treated their stylists like machines. When I left to open this place, half my clients followed me within the first month. Turns out people care more about who's doing their hair than where the salon is located. Do you ever regret leaving the security of working for someone else? Never. Because when you work for yourself, nobody can fire you on your wedding day. Her words hit home with startling clarity. I had spent 12 years building my career within Grandview's corporate structure, always focused on climbing their ladder and earning their approval. But now I was beginning to realize that the skills and relationships I had developed were portable assets that belonged to me, not to them. My phone buzzed with a text message from Maya. Sarah, David just announced that Jennifer will be presenting the Serenity integration plan to the board on Monday. He's asking our team to prepare briefing materials for her over the weekend. Should we cooperate? I thought about Maya's question carefully. On one hand, I didn't want my team members to jeopardize their positions by refusing to cooperate with new management. On the other hand, I didn't want to help Jennifer prepare for a presentation that would determine the future of relationships I had spent 18 months building. I typed back, cooperate with any direct requests from David, but don't volunteer. Additional information beyond what's specifically asked. If Jennifer wants to understand the Serenity relationships, she should have conversations with the property owners themselves. Maya responded immediately. Understood. Sarah, there's something else. Word is spreading through the office about your departure. A lot of people are asking what really happened and whether this means more changes are coming. What are you telling them? That you're exploring new opportunities and that we should all be prepared for a very different department. Culture going forward. Carmen finished my hair and spun the chair around so I could see the final result. I looked like a bride. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup would be flawless in another hour, and my dress was waiting at home, pressed and beautiful and ready to make Jake cry when he saw me walking down the aisle. But underneath the bridal exterior, I felt like a warrior preparing for battle. The termination had crystallized something I hadn't fully recognized before. I didn't want to work for people who valued systems over relationships and corporate efficiency over personal integrity. I wanted to build something better, something that honored the trust that clients like Alessandro had placed in me. Carmen, thank you for making me look beautiful. I think this might be the most important day of my life in more ways than one. She hugged me carefully, avoiding disturbing my hair. Honey, you were already beautiful. I just helped you see it. Now go marry that man and then go show those idiots what they lost. I left the salon feeling transformed in ways that had nothing to do with my hairstyle. For the first time since the morning meeting, I felt like I was moving toward something positive rather than just recovering from something destructive. But as I drove toward my next appointment, my phone rang with a call from Patricia Williams, my attorney. Her voice carried the urgency of someone who had been researching legal options all morning. Sarah, I've been reviewing your employment contract and the Serenity acquisition documents. We need to talk immediately. What did you find? I found grounds for a wrongful termination lawsuit that could result in significant financial damages for Grandview. But more importantly, I found leverage that could force them to reverse their decision entirely. What kind of leverage? The kind that could get you your job back, with a promotion and a public apology, if that's what you want. But Sarah, before I explain the details, I need you to think carefully about what you actually want to achieve. Because once we use this leverage, there's no going back to the way things were. I pulled into the parking lot of the makeup studio where my next appointment was scheduled and sat in my car thinking about Patricia's question. What did I actually want to achieve? Did I want my old job back, working for people who had demonstrated such poor judgment and cruel timing? Did I want to spend the next several years proving that their decision was wrong? Or did I want something entirely different? Patricia, before you tell me about the leverage, let me ask you a question. If I were to start my own firm, how quickly could we make that happen? With your client relationships and track record, very quickly. Sarah, I think you should know that I've had 3 calls this morning from other attorneys whose clients are interested in talking to you about business opportunities. What kinds of clients? Investment firms looking for hospitality acquisition expertise, family office managers who need help with international hotel investments, and one very interesting call from a private equity group that specializes in relationship-based acquisitions. I sat in my car feeling like the universe was conspiring to push me toward a decision I had been afraid to make on my own. The termination that had seemed like a catastrophe 6 hours ago was beginning to look like the catalyst for opportunities I never would have pursued if I had remained comfortable in my corporate position. Patricia, let's schedule a meeting for Monday morning to discuss both options, fighting the termination and starting a new firm. I want to understand all of my choices before I decide how to proceed. That sounds wise. But Sarah, there's one more thing. If you're serious about starting your own firm, you should know that the timing might be perfect. The Serenity property. Owner's letter threatening to withdraw from their agreements could create exactly the market opportunity you would need to launch successfully. How so? If they exit their contracts with Grandview, they'll need a new acquisition partner. And they've already made it clear that they prefer to work with you rather than with corporate hotel chains. That could be the foundation client base for your new firm. After ending the call with Patricia, I sat in the parking lot thinking about the strange way that life sometimes forces you toward decisions you wouldn't have made voluntarily. 6 hours ago, I had been a corporate executive, planning to return from my honeymoon to a promotion and a corner office. Now I was considering whether to start my own company with clients who were threatening to abandon my former employer. It wasn't the wedding day I had planned, but it might turn out to be exactly the wedding day I needed. The makeup studio was a sanctuary of soft lighting and classical music. the kind of place designed to make brides feel pampered and beautiful in the hours before their ceremony. My makeup artist, Sophia, had been recommended by 3 different friends who had used her for their own weddings, and she had a reputation for creating looks that photographed beautifully while still appearing natural and timeless. But as I settled into the makeup chair and Sophia began her consultation, I realized that achieving a bridal glow while simultaneously processing a career crisis was going to require acting skills I wasn't sure I possessed. "Tell me about your vision for today," Sophia said, studying my face in the bright mirror that surrounded her makeup station. "Are you thinking natural and romantic, or more dramatic and glamorous?" I looked at my reflection, seeing a woman who had been fired 6 hours before her wedding, but who needed to look radiant for the most important photographs of her life. I want to look like myself, but the absolute best version of myself. I want to look confident and happy and completely present in the moment. Sophia nodded knowingly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Look, that's my specialty." As she began working on my foundation, I found myself oddly grateful for the ritualistic nature of wedding preparation. The careful application of primer, foundation, and concealer felt like armor being applied for battle, each layer helping me transform from the woman who had been blindsided in a conference room into the bride who would walk down the aisle with grace and confidence. While Sophia worked, my phone continued to buzz with messages and calls. I had turned off the sound, but I could see the screen lighting up every few minutes with communications that I knew were related to the fallout from my termination. "Big day at work too?" Sophia asked, noticing my phone activity while she blended eyeshadow. "You could say that. Sometimes life gives you multiple challenges at once, and you have to figure out how to handle them all with equal grace." "I've done makeup for a lot of brides over the years," Sophia said, focusing intently on creating the perfect cat eye with liquid liner. "And I've learned that the women who handle pre-wedding stress with the most grace are usually the ones who are best at handling life's challenges in general. It's like wedding days reveal who you really are when everything is on the line." Her words resonated more deeply than she probably intended. This wedding day was definitely revealing who I really was when everything was on the line. It was showing me that I could be fired from my dream job and still choose to celebrate the most important personal milestone of my life. It was demonstrating that I could face betrayal and uncertainty while still believing in love and commitment and the future Jake and I were building together. But it was also revealing something else. I was stronger and more resourceful than I had given myself credit for. 6 hours ago, I had thought my career depended entirely on my position at Grandview. Now, I was beginning to realize that my career was built on skills, relationships, and reputation that belonged to me regardless of which company name appeared on my business cards. My phone lit up with another call, this time from a number I didn't recognize with an international country code. I decided to answer it, curious about who might be calling from overseas on my wedding day. Sarah Chen speaking. "Ms. Chen, this is Marcus Wheeler calling from London. I'm a partner at Pemberton Capital, and I've been following your work on international hospitality acquisitions for several years. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I wanted to discuss a potential opportunity with you." I caught Sophia's eye in the mirror and gestured that I needed to take this call. She nodded and continued working on my makeup while I processed this unexpected conversation. "Mr. Wheeler, I appreciate your interest, but today is actually my wedding day. Perhaps we could schedule a time to speak next week." "Of course, and congratulations on your wedding. But Ms. Chen, I'm calling because we've just learned about some developments at Grandview that might create an opportunity for both of us. We've been looking for someone with your specific expertise to lead our hospitality investment division, and the timing might be perfect for a conversation about your future plans." I felt my pulse quicken. Marcus Wheeler was calling about a job opportunity on the same day I had been fired. Either this was an extraordinary coincidence, Or word of my termination was already spreading through the hospitality investment community faster than I had expected. How did you hear about developments at Grandview? We have relationships with several of the property owners in the Serenity portfolio. When they learned that you were no longer managing their accounts, they reached out to us about potential alternative arrangements. They spoke very highly of your work and suggested that we should explore ways to work with you directly. The Serenity property owners weren't just threatening to withdraw from their agreements with Grandview. They were actively reaching out to other investment firms about working with me personally. This went far beyond the contract compliance issues Alessandro had mentioned earlier. This was a coordinated effort to move their business relationships to wherever I landed next. Mr. Wheeler, I'm obviously interested in learning more about your opportunity, but as I mentioned, today is my wedding day. Could we schedule a proper conversation for early next week? Absolutely. But Ms. Chen, I wanted you to know that if you're interested in exploring this opportunity, we could move very quickly. We have $500 million in committed capital specifically for hospitality acquisitions, and we've been looking for the right person to lead that initiative. Based on the recommendations we've received, you might be exactly what we're looking for. $500 million in committed capital. That was more than twice the size of the acquisition budget I had managed at Grandview. It was the kind of opportunity that could allow me to work on deals that were even larger and more complex than the Serenity acquisition. I'll have my assistant reach out to schedule a meeting for Monday or Tuesday, I said. And Mr. Wheeler, thank you for the congratulations on my wedding. It's turning out to be a day of new beginnings in more ways than one. After ending the call, I sat in the makeup chair feeling like I was watching my professional life reorganize itself in real time. In the span of 6 hours, I had gone from being a terminated employee to being actively recruited by international investment firms. The relationships I had built over 12 years weren't just portable assets. They were actively working on my behalf to create new opportunities. Sophia was applying mascara with the precision of a surgeon, creating lashes that would look perfect in photographs while still appearing natural. Good news? She asked, having overheard enough of the conversation to know it was business-related. Potentially very good news. Sometimes when one door closes, 3 others open. I love those kinds of days. The universe has a way of rearranging things when you're ready for something better. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. Babe, I've been handling logistics on our end. Patricia briefed me on the legal situation, and I've set up meetings for Monday with 2 different firms that want to talk to you about partnerships. Also, your parents landed safely, and they're excited to meet my family at the rehearsal dinner tonight. How are you feeling? I typed back, like I'm about to marry the most supportive man in the world. Also, like I might be about to start the most exciting chapter of my career. See you at the altar. Can't wait. Love you. Sophia finished my makeup and turned the chair so I could see the final result. I looked like a bride. More than that, I looked like a woman who was completely in control of her life, ready to celebrate love while simultaneously building an empire. Perfect, I said, and I meant it in more ways than makeup. I drove from the makeup studio to my apartment, where I would put on my wedding dress and take the photos that would capture this extraordinary day. But first, I needed to make one more phone call. I dialed Alessandro Romano's number, knowing that it was early evening in Italy, and he would likely be available to talk. Sarah, how are you feeling on your wedding day? Actually, Alessandro, I'm feeling surprisingly optimistic. I wanted to update you on some developments that might affect our conversation from this morning. What developments? I've received several calls today from investment firms that are interested in working with me. Apparently, word of my departure from Grandview has spread quickly, and there are people who see it as an opportunity rather than a setback. Alessandro's voice took on the tone of someone who was not at all surprised by this news. Sarah, I must confess something to you. After our call this morning, I made some phone calls of my own. I spoke with Marcus Wheeler at Pemberton Capital, David Morrison at Blackstone Europe, and Anna Chen at Singapore Hospitality Partners. I told them that a very talented acquisitions executive had become available, and that they should be interested in speaking with you. I laughed, realizing that Alessandro had been actively working to create opportunities for me while I was getting my hair done for my wedding. Alessandro, you've been networking on my behalf? Of course. Sarah, you must understand something. In our business, relationships are everything. When we trust someone and they are treated badly, we take care of them. We make sure they land somewhere better. It is how we operate. What did you tell them about me? I told them the truth, that you are the most ethical and competent acquisitions executive we have ever worked with, that you understand family businesses and respect cultural values, that you delivered a $1 billion acquisition that everyone said was impossible, and that any firm that hires you will immediately have access to property owners who are looking for alternatives to working with traditional corporate hotel chains. I sat in my car outside my apartment building, overwhelmed by the generosity and loyalty of someone I had worked with professionally, but who was treating me like family. Alessandro, I don't know how to thank you. You don't thank me. You succeed. You build something beautiful and ethical and profitable, and you remember that business should be about more than just money. It should be about relationships and trust and creating value for everyone involved. If I do start my own firm, would you seriously consider working with me? Sarah, I will do more than consider it. If you start your own firm, we will be your first client. We have been discussing expansion opportunities in North America, and we would prefer to work with someone we trust rather than going through the traditional acquisition process with corporate hotel chains. After ending the call with Alessandro, I walked into my apartment feeling like I was preparing for the first day of the rest of my life rather than just getting dressed for my wedding ceremony. The white dress hanging in my closet represented more than just a commitment to Jake. It represented a commitment to building a future that honored my values and utilized my talents in ways that created value for everyone involved. Jake was waiting for me in the living room, dressed in his navy suit and looking like he had stepped out of a magazine. When he saw me, his face lit up with the kind of smile that made me remember why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. You look absolutely incredible, he said, wrapping his arms around me carefully so as not to disturb my hair or makeup. How do you feel? Like I'm about to marry my best friend and business partner. Business partner? Jake, I think we're about to embark on an adventure that's bigger than either of us imagined. If I start my own firm, I'm going to need someone who understands finance and operations, and who can help me build something sustainable. Jake's eyes sparkled with excitement. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, in business and in life. We spent the next hour taking photographs in our apartment and around Lincoln Park, capturing images that would document not just our wedding day, but the day we decided to build something extraordinary together. The photographer, Maria, had an eye for moments that revealed emotion and character, and I knew that these photos would tell the story of a couple who had faced adversity and chosen to respond with courage and optimism. As we drove to the Chicago Botanic Garden for our ceremony, my phone buzzed with one final message of the day. It was from Maya. Sarah, I wanted you to know that 4 people from our team have asked me about the possibility of joining you if you start your own firm. We believe in you, and we want to be part of whatever you build next. I showed the message to Jake, who was driving while I handled the endless stream of communications that seemed to be reshaping my career in real time. Sounds like you're going to have a full team before you even have an office, he said. Sounds like we're going to have a full team. The Chicago Botanic Garden was transformed into a fairy tale setting for our ceremony. White flowers, soft lighting, and the kind of autumnal beauty that made Chicago magical in October. Our families and friends had gathered to celebrate our marriage, completely unaware of the corporate drama that had unfolded earlier in the day. As I walked down the aisle toward Jake, surrounded by everyone we loved, I realized that this was exactly how this day was supposed to unfold. Not according to the plan I had made months ago, but according to a plan that honored both my personal happiness and my professional integrity. The termination that had seemed like a catastrophe 12 hours earlier had become the catalyst for opportunities I never would have pursued if I had remained comfortable in my corporate position. The betrayal that had threatened to ruin my wedding day had instead shown me who my real allies were and what kind of future I wanted to build. During our vows, Jake promised to support my dreams, even when they required taking risks that scared both of us. I promised to build a life and a business that honored our shared values and created opportunities for the people we cared about. When we kissed as husband and wife, I felt like we were sealing more than just our marriage commitment. We were sealing our commitment to building something together that would be bigger and better than anything either of us could create alone. At the reception, Alessandro Romano raised a toast that summarized the day perfectly. To Sarah and Jake, who remind us that the best response to betrayal is not revenge, but building something so beautiful and successful that people forget the original ever existed. As we danced our first dance as husband and wife, Jake whispered in my ear, "Ready for the adventure? Ready to build an empire." 3 months later, Chen Rodriguez Hospitality Partners had raised $50 million in initial funding and signed exclusive partnerships with 8 international property owners who had terminated their relationships with traditional hotel chains. Maya had joined as Director of Operations, along with 3 other team members from Grandview. Alessandro Romano had become our first major client, expanding his portfolio through acquisitions that preserved local culture while achieving international scale. Grandview had lost the entire Serenity portfolio when the property owners exercised their right to exit their agreements due to contract violations. Jennifer Hartwell had returned to Meridian after 3 months of trying to manage relationships she had never built. James Morrison had resigned under pressure from the board of directors after the failed integration became a case study in how not to manage international acquisitions. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that Jake and I had built something together that honored our values while creating opportunities for the people who had supported us when everything seemed to be falling apart. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that ever happens to you. Sometimes getting fired 6 hours before your wedding becomes the beginning of a story that ends with building exactly the kind of company you always wished you could work for. And sometimes the people who try to destroy your career end up giving you the greatest gift of your professional life: the motivation to prove that you never needed them as much as they needed you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.